Hi, my name is Bibek Adhikari. I am your English instructor. In today's class, we are going to solve the grammar portion of Unit 10, that is preferences and likelihood. So let's begin. Right, we'll study about preferences and then we'll study about likelihood structure. So let's begin by studying some of the preference structures. We often use words like, prefer or would rather to talk or ask about preferences. Like so, we use these structures. We say prefer, would rather when we talk about preference structures. For examples, let me write some examples first. I prefer living on my own. Another example could be, would you prefer to see a movie or go to a club? Another example could be, would you rather go shopping with me? Would you rather go shopping with me? So these are some of the examples. You see, these examples are quite different in meaning. When it comes to meaning, these structures are all different. And this is why learners of English often find them challenging. So here's how we can separate them. So we'll start from prefer, then we would go to would prefer, and we would then go to would rather. Right? So these three structures are, in fact, they're very different. The meaning is also different and the structures are also different. So let's study one by one. First of all, let us understand the difference in meaning. Now, what is the basic, difference in meaning? That is the first question that comes to our mind when we talk about any kind of preference structure. So let me write you two examples and I'll talk about the difference in meaning. He prefers reading books. Another example could be, I prefer going to the beach than going to a swimming pool. So these are some of the examples. The first one is, he prefers reading book, and another is, I prefer going to the beach than going to a swimming pool. Now, what is the difference in meaning? So we tend to use prefer to talk generally about likes, dislikes, and what we want. So this is, whenever we are using prefer, this means we are talking about likes, we are talking about dislikes, and we are talking about what we want. So when you say, I prefer reading books, that means you like reading books. And when you say, I prefer going to the beach than going to a swimming pool, that means what you like and what you dislike. Also, that also means what you want. You see, now that is the difference. Now let's understand other two structures, would prefer and would rather. So in general, when we talk about likes, dislikes, and what we want, we use the word prefer. Easy? Right. I would prefer to see him in person. Another example is, I would rather go home. Now these are two different examples. The first one is using the structure would prefer and another one is using the structure would rather. You see, whenever we use would prefer or would rather, we are being a little more specific. That is what we are doing. We are being a little more specific. That's why these two structures are used, because when we use would prefer and would rather instead of the general prefer, we are rather being a little more specific. As in the example, I would prefer to see him in person. So you're being very specific about who you want to see and how you want to see, meet the person. In second example, I would rather go home. You're being very specific what you want to do right now. What you want to do in life. You want to go home. So you're being a little more specific, and when you are being a little more specific, you use structures related to would prefer and would rather, right? Now let's talk about difference in form. We talked about the difference in meaning. Now let us understand the difference in form. First one, I prefer living in a city. Let me write you another example. I prefer to be told the truth. Let me write one more example. Would you rather stay at a hostel? So these are the three examples. Let's understand the difference in form one by one. I prefer living in a city. So we have a VING here. So this is what we call a gerund. It is called a gerund ending in ing. form. So we have prefer plus gerund, that is the form of the sentence. And if you read the second sentence, I prefer to be told the truth, we have to and followed by something else. So we have to followed by V1. This is called to plus infinitive, or it is also called to infinitive. So the structure is prefer plus to infinitive. And finally, would you rather stay at a hostel? This is something called base form of the verb. So we have a base form of the verb. So analyzing the structures, we get that we can use something like prefer plus gerund, or we can also use something like prefer plus to infinitive, and we can also use rather plus base form of the verb. So this is the difference in the form. Grammatically, so these are the differences we find. We already talked about the difference in meaning, right? Whenever we use the word prefer, we are generally talking about our likes and dislikes and what we want. But when we use would rather or would prefer, we are being a little more specific. That was the difference in meaning, remember? Now, the difference in the form, this is what we call the difference in the form. Now, let's understand different preposition to state the choice. We can use a lot of different prepositions while we are using these preference structures, and they are difference in the choice of prepositions. Difference in the choice of prepositions. Now let's understand this. The first one is, I'd prefer living in a city to living in a country. Let me write you another example. I would prefer being alone to being with the wrong person. So let's understand these two. I would prefer living in a city to living in a country. The second one is, I'd prefer being alone to being with the wrong person. Prefer, would prefer follows to. So when we use prefer or would prefer, because I'd is used, so would prefer. Whenever we use prefer or would prefer, we use to afterwards, followed by a to, also followed by a to. So we use the preposition to. We never say I'd prefer living in a city than living in a country. That is wrong, right? But when we use would rather, we use than. So let's write that example too. Here's a sentence. I would rather talk to him in person than call him on the phone. So this is the sentence. I would rather talk to him in person than call him on the phone. This is the sentence, right? So we don't use than after using prefer. We say something like, I prefer tea to coffee. I prefer tea to coffee. We never say something like, I prefer tea than coffee, and that would be very wrong. And to say something like, I would rather talk to him in person to call him on the phone, now that is again wrong. So this is wrong, this is wrong, right? So prefer follows to, whereas would rather follows than. That is the general choice of preposition. So we don't use than after prefer, we use to. And we use than after would rather. So that is the general way of using the preference structure. So we studied about 3 different structures, starting from prefer, then we talked about would prefer, and finally we studied about would rather, right? So these are the 3 structures that we use whenever we are talking about preferences, right? We use prefer to say we like one thing or one activity than another. We can use prepositional phrase with to when we compare 2 things, like I prefer tea to coffee. And we use would prefer followed by a to infinitive to talk about present or future preferences. And finally, we use would rather when we are making comparisons. You see, when we are making comparisons, we use would rather. Likes, dislikes, present or future preferences, and this is comparison, specific comparison. Now let us go to the second topic, that is likelihood. We use structures like may or might when we talk about 50% probability of likelihood. This is whenever there's a 50% chance of happening of something, we use may or might. We also use it's sure or certain or bound to. when we talk about 100% probability, something is sure to happen, something is certain to happen, or something is bound to happen. So we are talking about 100% probability. We use probably, or is likely to, or unlikely to when we talk about more than 60% or 50% of probability. There are some more examples. Let's study them. We also use certainly or definitely when we talk about, let's say, more than 90% of probability. And we use I doubt when you are in doubt. You don't know, you say I doubt. You say will not when you know something is more than 90% not going to occur. So you say will not, something is not going to happen. You say I expect. You're expecting, that means there is more than 60% of probability. You're expecting something. You can also use could. There's another structure, could. Could also means more than 50% of probability something is going to happen. I doubt means there's some certain level of doubt. Let's say 50% doubt is there. So these are the structures. May, might is you're bound to, likely to and likely to, could, I doubt, will not. So these are the structures we use when we talk about likelihood. We are talking about degree of likelihood. Something is going to happen in future, something may not be going to happen in future. We don't know. So we are using these different structures. Let's revise them once again. So we start from here. May, might for 50% probability is sure to. Something is sure to happen, certain to happen, or bound to happen. That means 100% probability. Probably is likely to, unlikely to means 60% of probability. Something is likely to happen. It is likely to rain. That means 60% chances of raining. When you say it is sure to rain or it is bound to rain, 100% it's going to rain. It may rain or might rain. That means chances are 50-50. May rain, may not rain. Who knows? Here are more structures. When you say certainly, definitely, so again 90%, it's certainly going to rain means it will rain. I doubt if it will rain. So 50% doubt is there. Will not, 90% okay. I expect more than 60%. Could is also like might. So there's another structure, might, which also gives 50% probability. So these are likelihood structures. Let's use them in sentences. So here is a question. There is blank space to be much snow this winter. So there is, you can say something like there is likely to be much snow this winter. That could be one answer. Here's another question. In 10 years time, everyone is blank space have a digital watch. Everyone is certain to have a digital watch. Everyone is bound to have a digital watch. Or if you don't think that everyone is certain or bound to have a digital watch, you can say everyone is likely to have a digital watch, or everyone is unlikely to have a digital watch. So like this, you can use the likelihood structures. With this, we come to the homework section of today's class. Now your homework is going to be very short and sweet. That is, write a paragraph of 10 sentences on the impacts of good or bad habits in a person's career using the structures of probability. So we learned the many structures of probability, right? So I want you to write a paragraph of 10 sentences on the impacts of good or bad habits in a person's career using the structures of probability. I just showed you the many structures of probability, including may, might, is certain to, bound to, structures like that. Now, by using those structures, I want you to write a paragraph of 10 sentences, and that is your homework. Pretty easy, right? So with this, we have come to end of today's class. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding this video series, feel free to write us at learning@deerwalk.edu.np. Thank you.